Rise up and wise up. You are listening to the Sagely Wisdom Podcast, the newest addition to the Cornell University Library of Podcasts, which, last I checked, doesn't exactly exist. So, hey, congratulations on getting on board with a trend-setting show like this. I'm your host, Mike Troup. I'm Cornell MBA class of 2017, and it will be my honor and pleasure to carry you through this show for its existence to infinity and beyond every Wisdom Wednesday, where we hope to be releasing new episodes, new stories from new storytellers, students in the current Johnson community, alums, and the greater Cornell community abroad. So, why the emphasis on storytelling here in the Cornell community and the business school in particular? Well, it starts just a year back where a group of my fellow colleagues at the Johnson School came up with a brilliant idea to take the TED Talks format and convert it to Red Talks, being that we are the Cornell Big Red here. Because there are a lot of stories to be told walking these halls. As a matter of fact, part of the application process to get into Cornell's MBA program is a little more out of the box. It's a little more liberal artsy than most business school applications that you would see around the country. It involves writing a table of contents to your life story. And what those brilliant people came to realize, and what I've come to realize over the last year or so, is that those stories, wonderful as they may be, have a tendency to disappear after the application process. They get you through the interview, they get you admission to the school, and then once you come through the doors of Sage Hall at Cornell University, they don't disappear, they just get covered up by Excel spreadsheets, HBS case reviews, and buzzwords like synergies and economies of scale. And they replace the words, the more colorful language that told the stories of your life and who you are and what got you to the damn school in the first place. And that's what I'm interested in. That's what the Red Talks folk wanted to hear. That's what I want to hear. And that's what we're assuming that you listening at home want to hear as well. So there will be two types of episodes that you hear when you tune into Sagely Wisdom. The first is the type of episode that you're going to hear today, where I've had a chance to sit down with a Red Talk speaker and get his talk to live on in perpetuity through the majesty of the internet and this podcast. In episodes like this, there will not be a lot of me blabbering up front, just an introduction to what you're going to get to hear, to that Red Talk, and bam, there comes the Red Talk. It'll be anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes in length for the entirety of the episode. Perfect for your morning commute, maybe a study break, or hell, even a bedtime story. Who doesn't like a Red Talk bedtime story? The second type of episode, which is forthcoming, will be a collection of short stories, shorter snippets of those table of contents essays that I've described, where we pluck chapters from different students' table of contents and dive a little deeper to hear those stories, and they'll be collected around a central theme. I'll share a couple of my own, but those are wacky copier salesman stories from back in the day for another time, another place. And they'll cover travels around the world, near-death experiences, businesses failing, scandal, who knows really. But that's the whole point of the show, right? Is to get to hear some of these stories, to bring them to light, to bring them to this show, Sagely Wisdom. So, I appreciate everyone tuning in, whether you found us on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, whatever it is. I would appreciate if you enjoy what you hear at the end of the episode, go ahead and tap that subscribe button so that you can have new episodes of Sagely Wisdom delivered to your inbox every Wisdom Wednesday. If you hear today's show or any show in the future and think, hey, you know what? I can do this. Doesn't sound that hard. I got a great story to tell. Shoot me an email. sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. That's sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. Drop me a line. Let me know the story you want to tell, and I will gladly have you on to share it with the wide world of Sagely Wisdom fanatics, the fan base that I have to assume is growing at a rapid, nearly unmeasurable pace. Those are all the juicy bits, the details, the housekeeping that you need to know about. Just subscribe. It would be appreciated. And email sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com if you want to be a part of the show. But without further ado, I think it's time to get into it because I had a chance to sit down with one hell of a man, Graham Pearson. And now, before coming to Johnson, Graham worked as a digital strategist. He advised a range of brands on how to best reach their consumer with online advertising. But in the year before coming to Johnson, Graham kind of got interested in this idea of acting like an entrepreneur in the workplace. He actually invented a term he calls intrapreneurialism. I think you're going to enjoy hearing about it. He worked at his past agency to create initiatives that gave his colleagues an outlet for their own creativity. Graham's a pretty interesting guy himself. He's also a longtime musician, digital photographer, and a novice web designer. He's always on the lookout for new things to learn. But I'm going to hand the floor to him because instead of learning, he's going to do a little bit of teaching here on Sagely Wisdom. So enjoy your time with Graham Pearson, Cornell MBA, class of 2018.
I hate Facebook. Well, let me rephrase that. I hate the story of Facebook. In 2004, Mark Zuckerberg and his roommates stumbled onto a concept that consisted of using the internet and your .edu to create an exclusive network of friends. And because of the connective nature of the platform, it slowly evolved from a dorm room project to the definition of social media. When Mark Zuckerberg and his roommates launched the network, they didn't just start a media phenomenon. I think they also set a precedent for anyone thinking of building a new concept. Here were a couple of guys, brilliant guys, who didn't just go to Harvard, they dropped out of Harvard. They created the most impactful concept of our generation, took the company public, and built it up to be a near $400 billion titan that it is today. And Facebook isn't the only story. We now live in the age of the startup. Snapchat, Instagram, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, Warby Parker, Pokemon Go, and so many more. With most of the country coming online and onto a mobile device, the barrier to entry has never been lower. Now, I would argue that for a lot of people, the stories of Facebook and other iconic startups have defined what it means to be an entrepreneur. That in order to build a new concept, you need to be a Mark Zuckerberg. And this sort of thinking can be insidious. It can make the curve seem so steep and so risky that many people don't think being creative or entrepreneurial can amount to anything substantive. I was certainly one of these people. Before coming to Johnson, I was a digital advertising strategist. I worked at an ad agency and advised brands on how to spend their ad budgets in the digital space. As part of my work, I met with many digital vendors and tech partners to learn the emerging opportunities for marketers online. Now, when you start meeting with these people and these companies, you develop an aspiration to take on your own project one day. But eventually, time starts to pass and you start to have other aspirations, going to grad school, starting a family, other financial commitments. And slowly, the entrepreneurial route starts to become less realistic. But in our culture, since the startup is propped up as sort of the gold standard of success, this sort of thinking can also put you into a rut. And this is sort of what happened to me. Maybe I missed my chance to be an entrepreneur. But then, about a year ago, I had the opportunity to take a class called Invention and Entrepreneurship at NYU. Now, the goal of the class was to teach us how to take an idea that was floating around in our head and turn it into an initiative that could actually be executed. The class was sponsored by my company, and they were looking to inspire more entrepreneurial thinking within the company. We covered a number of entrepreneurial concepts, things like quick iteration, minimal viable product, wireframes, the business model canvas, SWOT analyses, Porter's 5 forces, etc. And what slowly became clear is that all the techniques an entrepreneur uses to create an independent concept can easily be applied to any career. And this is what intrapreneurship is. As the prefix suggests, an intrapreneur behaves like an entrepreneur while working within a large organization. It is a management style that integrates risk-taking, the innovative approaches, and motivational techniques that are more traditionally thought of as being in the domain of an entrepreneur. The big revelation for me was that if we detach entrepreneurship from the notion of creating our own business and instead apply it to anything we are doing, as an intrapreneur would suggest, then we can be entrepreneurial wherever we are, whenever we want. This concept really changed the way I approached work and looked at my career. So I want to give you two short examples of how I've employed this thinking and how I continue to employ this thinking. My first story I'll call Chicken Scratch Decks. So for those of you who have worked in any sort of consulting role, you are probably very familiar with PowerPoint. In my job before coming to Johnson, I basically lived in PowerPoint. And anyone who lives in PowerPoint knows that formatting takes a big chunk of your time. But what's easy to forget is that there is actually content that needs to be conveyed in a PowerPoint. And I had made a bad habit of trying to format a deck as I created that content. And of course, I had a manager that needed to sign off on these decks, so I would spend a huge amount of time writing, formatting, etc., and then show her the deck for feedback. And since the content and the formatting are inherently linked, then if there was any change to content, I would end up spending 5 times the amount of time on formatting. If you just looked at time invested and I told you I had a 50-50 chance of getting sign-off on what I produced on a good day, you'd think I'm absolutely nuts. Then I learned about minimal viable products, or an MVP, in my class. So an MVP is a startup concept that says when you are creating something new, you should work towards a version that is going to get you the highest rate of return. In other words, the greatest difference between how much you put in and what you get back. So think about Dropbox. When they were pitching the initial concept to investors, they didn't show them a pretty online interface with all the final colors and minimalist buttons. They showed them the idea via really basic means that if you uploaded a file onto your computer, it would get uploaded to the cloud. And that's what the VCs should be giving the company money for. So after learning this, I was like, wait, that's what I should be doing with decks. When I create the first draft of a deck, my investment is time and effort, while my return is quite simply feedback on concepts and flow. If I don't have these pieces in a good place, then formatting is essentially a complete waste of time. So what was the solution? Start my decks in the roughest form possible and get the ideas down first. So I tried this with the next deck. My first inclination was to start putting together the look and feel of the deck, but then I remembered MVP. I asked myself, what do I really need from my manager for this first draft? The answer was sign-off on the flow of the deck. If I didn't have that, there was no amount of formatting that would help me. With this in mind, I made a 20-page deck in about 15 minutes. So if you were able to take a look at my slides, you would see that they were in the roughest form possible. They were simply headlines, a couple bullets of what was on my brain at that moment. One slide quite literally had nothing on it other than one word at the top, which was radio. So obviously this is not something I would ever hand to a client, but I wasn't giving this to a client. I was giving this to my manager, from whom I needed feedback only on the initial concepts and flow. This approach arguably saved me hours and also allowed for a more flexible discussion with my manager, since the deck was more or less a blank canvas. So that was my first example. The second example is something I'm a little prouder of than a chicken scratch deck, although I do love my chicken scratch decks. I call this story Turning Pizza into Bagels. So another thing we learned in the class was about iteration of a product, the several forms it needs to go through before it's viable for a market. This might seem straightforward, certainly if you are starting your own business and even within a traditional career setting. But what if you think of an initiative at your job that isn't mandated? An idea that goes beyond the scope of what your title is, but something you think the company could really benefit from. I would argue that many times people who do have these types of ideas give up after the first pitch to their manager or colleagues because they don't see it as their own project and don't look at it from an entrepreneur's perspective. So rewind about 3 years ago when I was at a different company, but in a similar role. I had an idea that I thought would give my colleagues an outlet to be more innovative. As digital strategists and media strategists in general, we were working with all these companies with amazing products, and it was likely that it would spark an idea within our four walls. So I was like, people should have a chance to get these ideas some visibility. So I worked out this concept that I called Pizza and Pitches, a 2-hour session every month where people with cool ideas could pitch them to the rest of the team. It didn't need to be a brand new product. Maybe it's a new way to work with an ad company, or maybe it was a service we were providing to our clients, but weren't charging for. And if you did have an idea, you needed to build a small deck, which I called a decklet, to pitch to the rest of the team, as everyone ate pizza and asked questions. If everyone liked it, especially our managing director, it would go up the ladder to either agency management or our client, depending on the idea. So I put this in front of my managing director, and he loved it. It was something he had been thinking of, and he thought it was going to help inspire a lot more ideas. So at the next all-hands meeting, I presented the concept to the whole team. And I was pretty confident this was awesome. Since my managing director gave it the thumbs up, I was like, I'm gold, I'm good. But a little bit to my surprise, I didn't just get blank stares. I actually got pretty angry stares. And what suddenly occurred to me was that people were already really busy. We pushed abnormal hours as it was, and here I am telling everyone, hey, you know what'd be fun? Another deliverable. So in that moment, I tacked on a note about it was totally voluntary, and if anyone was interested, I would be around after to talk about it. And no one stayed. And I was pretty crushed. Here was this idea that I thought was super cool, and about 20-ish people were just like, nope. So I gave up on that point. I was like, well, I tried this. It didn't work. Time to move on. I didn't have much time or money invested in it, so it was pretty easy to just give up on it. Now, fast forward to when I am taking this class and we are going over iterating a product. We talked about how products will go through endless alphas, betas, and updates as the product evolves. Think how many times you need to update apps on your phone. Right now, Google Music is in 3.10.10111, and I think Facebook Messenger is in about version 86 at this point. So obviously this happens a lot. But for whatever reason, when I was hearing about this, Pizza and Pitches popped back into my head. I realized I never iterated the product. I took valuable feedback and I never did anything with it. So I decided I would try to iterate it and pitch it to my new colleagues. The biggest piece of feedback I got was that people did not want another deliverable. So creating a deck was probably not a great idea. Next thing was that people didn't have a ton of time to give. So I couldn't demand a huge chunk of their time. Finally, people did like the idea of pizza. So I should probably incorporate food into the next version. What was the result? The result was something I called Bagels and Brains, a 1-hour block every 2 weeks where I brought in bagels and held an open meeting for anyone to come and brainstorm without commitment. To keep some sort of structure, I would pick a random company, create a fake or harp on a real problem, and it would be up to the group to talk about how we would advise this company if they were our client. After launching it with just the people I managed, who sort of had to come because they were my test subjects, the idea iterated 2 more times, and slowly it grew from 4 people to about 20 people just before I left. I just recently spoke to one of my colleagues, and she let me know that the initiative is still going. Today, I try to approach everything this way. I clarify what the deliverable is, who it is going to, and what the desired outcome is. And I look to maximize my time and my energy so that I can iterate faster and give myself more time to do other projects. So I'm coming to the end here, but a friend of mine once told me that I should never leave without something actionable behind. So some easy things I would invite everyone here to try. First, if you have an idea, just tell somebody about it. There really is no downside to this, and you never know if someone will actually be interested and want to explore it with you. This is probably more important at an MBA program like here at Johnson, since you have an entire class of people who have been vetted and deemed to be a positive addition to the business world. The second point, and this is sort of tied to the first point, but you can be just as entrepreneurial in an established company as you can by starting your own. In fact, when you think about the types of people that companies are looking to hire, or even looking to promote, or even looking to put into a management position of their company, they're often looking for those people who are creative and think outside the box. And if you look at the problem as from an entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial perspective, you are going to be putting yourself as someone who does exactly that. So not only is it good for the company and the people around you, but it is inherently good for your own career as well. The third point is, if you're passionate about something, ask yourself, how can I bring this into other parts of my life or even my career? You know, a lot of times people are artists at home. They sometimes are into music. Sometimes they're into, photography. They're into these kind of what things they would say are hobbies. And one thing that's helped me along the way is thinking about how can I take the things that I consider my hobbies, but extract the bigger picture and apply it to my job. So I would impress on anyone listening to this to ask yourself that question. What am I passionate about, and how do I incorporate it within whatever I'm doing? And then finally, and I think this is the most important one, is if you have an idea, just tell somebody about it. There's really no downside to this. And best case scenario, the person you tell gets very interested in it and wants to work on it with you. And then from there, you guys can expand the ideas because now you have more than just an N of one. So the final note I'll put in is that I, over the many years that I've been thinking about this intrapreneurial idea, I realized the other day I had actually never looked up the definition for an entrepreneur, which was kind of funny to me because I was kind of obsessed with this idea of being an entrepreneur. So the other day, I just did a simple Google search of entrepreneurship definition, and the first thing to pop up was the following. Entrepreneur, a noun. A person who organizes and operates a business or businesses taking on greater than normal financial risks in order to do so. Now, for me, this is much more generic than what I was expecting to see. Apart from the taking on the greater than normal financial risks, that first sentence of the person who organizes and operates a business or businesses, that's a really key part, because I think what this is saying is that, again, entrepreneurialism is not a career. It's more about how you approach the management of a business and whether you're taking on the skills that an entrepreneur would employ to create their own business. So I encourage everyone who's listened to this to go out there and no matter what you're doing, start to think outside the box and be an intrapreneur in whatever organization you're working in. Thank you.
Thank you to Graham Pearson for sitting down and sharing that wisdom with us today. And a big thanks also to the good folks at Red Talks, my wonderful friends who sent him my way and allowed this first episode of Sagely Wisdom to take place. And I can't get out of here without thanking all of you who took the time to check out the very first episode of the Sagely Wisdom podcast. Without you, there's really no point in doing the show in the first place, but I know you're out there. I know you enjoyed it. And if you did, go ahead and subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, however the hell you're listening. You'll find a way. You're smart tech people. And if you want to be on the show, if you have stories to tell, shoot me an email, sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. It's sagelywisdom1865@gmail.com. Yes, that's the year that Cornell University was founded. Very wise of me, I know. My name is Mike Troup. It's time for me to get the heck on out of here, but thank you for sharing your time with me and sharing this moment with me. I know I'll treasure it forever. This has been a Sagely Wisdom podcast, and we are all now the wiser for having tuned in. Have a wonderful rest of your day.